Welcome to today's historical deep dive. You've never seen a toothbrush. You believe demons live in fog. Your town blames goats for the plague. Welcome to the Middle Ages. This isn't the glittering court of kings or the hallowed halls of monasteries. This is the dirt, the bone, the raw, unvarnished existence of the vast majority, the peasants. If you love immersive, real storytelling about survival, belief, and forgotten lives, hit like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. And while you listen, drop a comment with the medieval fact that surprised you most, or what role you think you'd play if you were born in the year 1287. Would you be the tireless farmer, the fearful mother, the hopeful village healer, or perhaps the cynical gravedigger? There's no escaping your lot here, or so it seems. You are born into your place, bound by custom, law, and the sheer, inescapable demands of the land itself. It's a world where the sacred and the profane rub shoulders daily, where a miraculous harvest is as likely as the swift, brutal kiss of the plague. A world where the lines between faith, superstition, and grim necessity are blurred into a single hazy struggle. You live your entire life within a few miles of your birth. Your world defined by the fields you work, the Lord you serve, and the church bell that marks your meager hours. It is a life stripped bare of comforts we deem essential, yet rich in a different kind of knowing. The intimate, brutal knowledge of nature's whims, the stark reality of your own fragile body, and the constant low-grade hum of fear. Fear of hunger, fear of sickness, fear of the Lord's wrath, fear of the unseen forces lurking just beyond the firelight. But also, moments of profound connection, of simple joy in a sunny day, of shared laughter in the face of hardship, of faith, however tinged with terror, that sees you through. It's a tapestry woven with threads of mud and sweat, woven tight with the sheer will to see another dawn. Let's begin and live the life they never got to finish. You wake to the brutal, familiar shock of cold, not the bite of winter air, though that will come later, but the penetrating chill that seeps from the packed earth floor, through the thin layer of straw, into your very bones. The fire in the central hearth, carefully banked last night with precious dung and scarce wood, has long ago surrendered its warmth, leaving only a faint, smoky scent in the air, thick with the breathing of humans and the snuffling of the sow sharing the corner. It's a scent you scarcely notice anymore, the smell of your life: smoke, damp earth, animal musk, unwashed bodies. Your hand instinctively reaches out, not necessarily for comfort, but for connection. A quick check, perhaps the warm, rough skin of your spouse beside you, their breathing shallow and steady, or the small, inert weight of a child curled close for warmth, their breath hot against your side. You feel the ache in your joints before you even lift your head, a daily testament to the unrelenting physical toll of your existence. Every limb feels heavy, stiff, reluctant to obey the summons of the coming day. Outside, the world is still gray, cloaked in the damp pre-dawn mist. But the roosters are crowing their urgent, timeless alarm, a sound that grates on your weariness. The muffled coughs of neighbors echo from nearby huts, a symphony of chronic ailments, damp, smoke, poor nutrition taking their toll, even before the day's labor begins. You know the sun is coming, its slow ascent marked by the gradual lightening of the air. But it brings not rest, only the summons to another day of labor that will chew you up and spit you out, bone-tired by dusk. This isn't just waking. It's the slow, reluctant resurrection of a body designed for toil, a mind wired for survival. It's the silent acknowledgement that the single, overriding purpose of your day, and indeed your life, is simply to endure, to scrape enough from the unforgiving ground and demanding Lord to see another dawn. Every sunrise is a small victory against the encroaching darkness and cold. Every sunset, a brief, precious respite before the next battle begins. You are a peasant of the Middle Ages, and the fight for existence starts now. You must rise. The first task is always the fire. The embers glow faintly if you were careful enough last night, a tiny spark of hope in the gloom. You add a handful of straw, some dry twigs gathered yesterday, then the precious dung patties dried in the sun, fuel that doesn't deplete the meager woodpile. It's a slow, patient coaxing of warmth, a ritual older than memory. As the first flames lick at the kindling, casting flickering shadows on the smoke-blackened roof, the hut slowly stirs. Children uncurl like small animals, eyes blinking in the low light. Your spouse pushes themselves up, groaning softly. Hunger is the first voice of the day, a dull ache in your gut. Breakfast, when there is one, is often just yesterday's leftover pottage, a thin gruel of whatever vegetables were available. Maybe some dried peas or beans if you were lucky, thickened with barley or oats. Meat is a rarity, a feast-day luxury, or something hunted quickly and secretly in the Lord's wood. A dangerous gamble. You eat standing, huddled near the fledgling fire. The taste bland, the texture rough, but it fills the emptiness, a temporary truce in the constant war against starvation. This daily miracle of even having this much food is tied directly to the capricious rhythm of the seasons, the fertility of the soil, and the terrifying unpredictability of pests and disease. A blight on the wheat, a murrain among the few precious chickens, a long, harsh winter. Any of these can mean the difference between scraping by and the slow, agonizing onset of famine, the plague of starvation. You see its signs in the sunken eyes of neighbors, the desperation in their movements. This constant threat weaves itself into every aspect of life, including belief. You might cross yourself before the first spoonful, not just for thanks, but to ward off evil humors or the envious eyes of unseen spirits that could sour the meal. You would never waste a single crumb. It's a sin against God and against your own survival. This isn't just prudence. It's a deep-seated superstition born of necessity. Wasting food is tempting fate, inviting the hunger you constantly strive to hold at bay. It's an unspoken rule, taught from the cradle. Every seed is sacred. Every kernel holds the potential for life, and its loss diminishes you. The contradiction is poignant. You rely utterly on the earth and God's grace for sustenance, yet you live in a state of perpetual vulnerability, knowing the slightest shift in luck, weather, or the Lord's mood can unravel everything. Was it faith in providence that sustained them, clinging to prayers for a good harvest and protection from blight? Or was it simply the grim, practical knowledge that they had to make the most of every single meager crumb? Perhaps it was both, intertwined so tightly that they were indistinguishable. A desperate hope layered upon a stark, undeniable reality. The pottage bowl is scraped clean. The brief moment of respite is over. The day demands you rise and meet it. The fields call. The Lord's work awaits. The fight for the next meal begins anew. You rise stiffly in the biting pre-dawn chill, the rough straw bedding clinging stubbornly to the coarse wool of your tunic. Your joints ache with the persistent dampness of the earth floor and the unending labor of yesterday. The air inside the small, dark dwelling is heavy with the stale scent of wood smoke and damp earth. Beside you, a child coughs, a weak, rattling sound that tightens your chest. This is how every day begins, not with hope, but with a quiet assessment of ailments and the pressing, fundamental need to fend off the pervasive, unseen threats that seem to swarm the very air you breathe. Your first conscious thought, after the ache of waking registers, is a hurried prayer, mumbled into the cold air before your feet even find the floor. It is not a thoughtful, soaring act of devotion, but a desperate, almost guttural plea to the saints you know by name. Saint Sebastian against plague, Saint Anthony against illness, Saint Barbara against sudden death. Anything to ward off the invisible humors, the ill fortune, the sudden fevers that could snatch a loved one, or yourself, away between sunrise and sunset. This isn't faith for comfort. It is faith as shield, as weapon, born of a terrifyingly real understanding that human strength, human knowledge, offers precious little defense in a world where the smallest cut could fester into death, where a bad harvest meant starvation, where the very fog outside might carry demons or pestilence. The next task is the fire. If embers survived the long night, coaxing them back to life is a painstaking ritual, a gentle blowing on tiny sparks, adding wisps of dry straw, then kindling. But often, they are truly dead, and you must scrape char off flint, strike steel, hoping for a spark that catches on tinder. Your fingers are numb with cold, the fuel often damp, despite your best efforts. Success is a small victory against the encroaching cold and darkness. As the flame catches and grows, smoke begins to fill the single room. It is thick, acrid, stinging your eyes until they stream. There is no chimney here, No carefully crafted flue to draw the smoke cleanly away. Its only exit is a simple, open hole in the thatch roof, a necessary compromise that lets in weather almost as readily as it lets out smoke. Everything you own, everything you breathe, is coated in a fine layer of soot. It is the smell of home, the smell of survival, the constant reminder of hardship. Your morning meal is a swift, silent affair. A scoop of pottage, the thin stew made from grains, perhaps fortified with a precious few scavenged roots or withered greens, if you are lucky, is ladled from a shared wooden bowl. It is yesterday's pottage, cool and bland, eaten quickly because time is not your own. There is no lingering over food, no conversation unconnected to the day's tasks. Leisure is a concept as alien as a chimney. Every moment, every action is yoked directly to the necessities of staying alive. You eat for fuel, for bare sustenance, not for pleasure or variety. This raw, unvarnished morning ritual strips away everything we take for granted. It highlights a fundamental truth of this life. Every act, every movement is dictated by necessity and scarcity. The prayer isn't a choice among many spiritual options. It is a desperate gamble for divine intervention in a world where human control is minimal, where the whims of weather and disease hold terrifying sway. The fire isn't for ambiance, it's for warmth and cooking, a fragile barrier against death by cold or hunger. The food isn't chosen, it is whatever sustains. This stark focus on necessity peels back the layers of modern convenience and choice, revealing the raw mechanics of existence. Ask yourself, in a world defined entirely by need, where comfort is non-existent and every breath is a negotiation with hardship, would you find the resilience to rise each morning? Or would the sheer weight of necessity crush the spirit before the body fails? What would remain of you if everything beyond immediate survival were stripped away? The dawn arrives, not as a gentle awakening, but as a summons to another day of relentless, unyielding effort. The light pierces the smoke-filled air, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the shafts, and the day's work begins. The damp air bites at your exposed skin the moment you step through the low doorway. Frost might still cling to the shadow sides of the cottages, even as the sun attempts its weak ascent. Before you stretch the fields, vast and daunting under the gray sky, often divided into narrow strips, shared by the villagers under the ancient, unyielding hand of the manorial system. These are the bones of your world, the canvas upon which your entire existence is painted in shades of mud, sweat, and seasonal greens or browns. Your tools lie ready, primitive but proven over generations. A heavy wooden ard, perhaps, its share tipped with iron if you are lucky, pulled by your precious oxen, whose steaming breath mists the air. Or maybe, if your holding is small or your fortunes meager, just a simple, bone-handled hoe to break the stubborn ground. The work is not just labor, it is a liturgy of the soil, turning the heavy, often stony earth, each clod lifted a small victory. sowing precious seeds, a handful at a time, praying silently for germination, for rain at the right moment, for sun when needed. Weeding endless rows under the hot sun, your back a permanent curve of ache. Then the harvest, a frantic race against the weather, followed by threshing in the barn, swinging a heavy flail until your shoulders scream and dust chokes the air. There are no machines to ease the burden, no quick fixes for worn-out muscles. Just the brute force of human and animal muscle pitted against the unyielding Earth's demand. This backbreaking, relentless physical demand is the very heartbeat of medieval peasant life. Your existence is not tied to coin or ledger books, but quite literally to the land's fertility, a direct, punishing transaction of sweat for sustenance. There is a profound connection here, a visceral understanding of where food truly comes from, a reality modern life has almost entirely erased, replacing it with supermarket shelves and abstract supply chains. This life forces you every single day to confront the true cost of basic needs, the sheer, bone-deep physical effort required to produce the bread you eat, the pottage that fills your belly. All this toil, this endless struggle, and yet one bad frost, one summer drought, one plague amongst the livestock, and the delicate balance tips into famine, into death. It is a constant, humbling reminder of human fragility against nature's caprice. Ask yourself, honestly, could you face this daily, unrelenting physical demand, this life where exhaustion is your constant companion and comfort is a fleeting rumor? Or has modern comfort softened us, collectively, beyond the capacity for such elemental, punishing challenges? This isn't just history. It's a mirror held up to our own resilience. The weak morning sun barely touches the frost outside your window, but you are already needed. Not on your own modest strips of field, waiting for your hand, but on the Lord's domain. This is boon work, the unpaid service that anchors your life to His. Your shoulders ache before the day even begins, anticipating the heavy plow you'll share with neighbors, turning the Lord's soil while your own hard-won patch lies fallow. Days bleed into one another like spilled wine, hauling timber for his fence, repairing his barn roof with hands calloused as oak bark, carting his harvest to market while your family's stomachs rumble. It's a constant, quiet drain, a fundamental condition of your existence here. Beyond the sweat and strained muscle, there are the rents. Coin is a phantom in your pocket, so you pay in what you produce, bushels of your precious grain after the harvest. A portion of your eggs, carefully gathered, a squealing piglet you raised yourself. Each item, surrendered, feels like a piece of your own body, a sacrifice to the invisible hand that governs your days. Then there are the banalities, the Lord's monopolies. You must take your grain to His mill to be ground, paying a fee in flour. You must use His oven to bake your bread, paying again. It's a tax on the very act of living, a reminder that even the most basic necessities flow through His control. Disobedience is not an option. The Lord Or more likely, his watchful, unforgiving bailiff is the law. A missed day of boon work, a suspected theft of grain, a refusal to use his mill. The penalties can be swift and severe. Fines that cripple, time in the stocks, even expulsion from the land you've worked your whole life. Your life, your labor, your movement, your identity, tied irrevocably to his authority. You are a serf, bound to the soil and its master, or perhaps a freeholder, but still beholden, still paying tribute, still expected to bow your head. This hierarchy isn't merely economic. It's the very bedrock of the medieval world, as solid and immovable as the stones of the Lord's castle. Your status, your lack of agency shapes your worldview, dictates your neighbors, limits your dreams to the scope of the next harvest. Yet this stark reality of power, flowing strictly from above, leaving those below with meager control, echoes strangely in our own time. The tension between those who own and those who labor, the quiet struggle for fair compensation and autonomy. It feels eerily familiar. What forms of boon work do we perform today? Perhaps less visible, but just as binding, just as expected. Ask yourself, would you fight against a system so deeply ingrained it feels like gravity? Or bend just enough to survive within the mold it provides? The air grows thick with the smell of wood smoke and simmering stew. You step outside your wattle and daub hut, squinting against the low sun. The village is stirring. Not just your household, but everyone. Old widow Ilara is already tending her chickens near the common green, her silhouette sharp against the pale sky. Young Thomas is driving his oxen toward the communal field, ready for the plowing. You see familiar faces, hear familiar voices calling out greetings. Or perhaps quiet judgments. This isn't just a place where you live. It's a single breathing body, and you are one of its cells. You work side by side, shoulder to shoulder. The heavy labor of the harvest demands it. You lend an arm, or perhaps a better tool, receiving help in turn when your own strength falters or your own plow breaks. If sickness strikes one home, others bring broth and quiet support, though perhaps they whisper about ill omens too. If a fire catches, the whole village pitches in, buckets flying, hands grabbing precious possessions from the flames. This isn't charity born of abstract virtue. It's cold, hard necessity. Your survival is literally tied to your neighbors. The village green isn't just dirt and grass. It's the communal heart. Children chase geese while the geese chase errant lambs. Arguments flare over boundaries or stray livestock, often settled not by written law, but by the reeve, a peasant like yourself, chosen or sometimes pressured to represent the village to the Lord, negotiating the crushing burden of rent and service. Disputes are untangled by village elders, relying on memory and custom, often with the powerful pressure of community opinion serving as the only judge and jury. There are no secrets here. Your life is an open book to those around you. Who argued last night? Whose goat got into whose cabbage patch? who is expecting a child, and who struggles to conceive, despite desperate prayers and charms. Every small victory, every small shame is known, discussed, absorbed into the collective consciousness. When evening falls and the work-weary hands find rest, the light of the hearth calls neighbors together. Tales are shared of saints and demons, of tricksters and heroes, of the endless, grinding labor of the land. Songs lift weary spirits. Simple presence brings warmth against the encroaching cold, a shared defiance against the vast, indifferent darkness outside the circle of firelight. Community here isn't a philosophy. It's the very mortar that holds your fragile existence together. Cooperation isn't a virtue to strive for. It's the only way the fields get plowed, the harvest gathered, the roof mended before the winter storms arrive. This intense, sometimes claustrophobic, interconnectedness is your safety net, catching you when you fall. It's a shared burden in hardship, yes, but also a shared, visceral joy when the harvest is good, or a child is born healthy, or the Lord demands less than expected. Yet, this constant, sometimes suffocating presence means there is no true solitude, no escaping the watchful eyes, the wagging tongues. Ask yourself, could you trade the silence of independence for the constant, sometimes heavy hum of human presence? What have we lost? Trading this medieval huddle for the fragmented connections of today, where the huddle is a choice, not a condition of life or death. Could you truly survive without the constant, intimate, undeniable presence of others? The scraping sound echoes in the small cottage, the wooden spoon searching the bottom of the clay pot for the last few clinging grains of last night's pottage. It is a familiar sound, the soundtrack to 1,000 mornings. The fire, nursed carefully overnight, provides little warmth, only a faint glow that silhouettes the figures stirring within the smoke. This gnawing emptiness in your belly is not a temporary inconvenience. It is the constant thrum beneath the surface of existence, the steady, quiet ache of hunger. Food is not a comfort here. It is a daily negotiation, a fragile peace treaty with scarcity. Your diet is a monotonous cycle. Coarse brown bread baked heavy with whatever grain the last harvest yielded. Thick pottage of peas or beans, sometimes supplemented by a sliver of hard cheese, or if your few hens are feeling generous, a precious egg. Meat is a phantom, whispered about more often than seen. Perhaps the village slaughters a pig at Martinmas, a brief, glorious indulgence that must be meticulously preserved, every scrap saved. Or maybe, if daring turns to foolishness, a poached rabbit from the Lord's wood, a risk that could cost you a hand or even life itself. Hunger drives people to desperate acts, makes the severe laws protecting game understandable, if still cruel. The Lord's venison is safe. Your belly is not his concern. Everything hangs on the harvest. It is the axis around which your year spins. The planting, the praying for rain, the desperate hope, through scorching summers or unexpected frosts. A good harvest is a year of survival, still lean, still monotonous, but survival. A bad year is a death sentence, slow and agonizing. Bellies bloat not from food, but from air and despair. Weakness settles in, making you easy prey for the swift hand of disease that always follows famine like a carrion crow. You learn to eat seasonally, to rely on the salt-cured meat, the dried peas, the onions stored in the root cellar, praying the stores stretch through the long, cold fingers of winter until the next tentative shoots appear in the fields. Waste is a sin, not just against God, but against your own future. Every crumb, every bone scrap boiled for broth has value. Nothing is discarded. The fear of famine isn't an abstract idea you read about in scrolls. It is a cold knot that tightens in your gut when the rain fails. A shadow that never truly leaves the edges of your vision. Living on this precipice fundamentally warps your relationship with food. It is not about pleasure, not about variety or flavor beyond the simple satisfaction of fullness that rarely lasts. It is pure, unadulterated fuel. Calories to keep you working the unforgiving land. Energy to survive the cold, the disease, the relentless toil. This raw perspective throws into stark relief the immense privilege of modern food security, an abundance unprecedented for the vast majority of humanity throughout history. It forces you to question our casual discarding of food, our obsession with dietary trends born of excess, the sheer, unbelievable volume we take for granted. Imagine, for a moment, your energy levels, your very life, dictated by the success of a single growing season. How would that reshape your values, your priorities? Would the things you worry about now even matter in a world where your next meal is never guaranteed? You understand deep in your bones that for your ancestors, food was not just substance, it was survival. You feel the weight of the sky on your shoulders. Every dawn is a gamble against the clouds. You watch them like hungry wolves circling the field. Too dark, they promise drowning rain. Too pale, they sneer with drought. There are no almanacs truly reliable, only generations of lore about bird flight and insect hum, about the direction of the wind when the bells chime noon. Your life, the lives of your children, the very breath in your lungs is tethered to the unpredictable whims of forces far beyond your village, beyond the king's castle, beyond even the Pope's reach. It is the sun, the rain, the frost, the biting wind, the sudden fury of hail that determines if you eat, if you live to see another spring. Too much rain after sowing rots the precious seed in the ground, turning your hope into a muddy grave. Too little turns the rich earth to dust, blowing away the promise of harvest with every dry gust. A late frost can kill the budding fruit trees, and early one can blacken the standing grain just weeks before the sickle should swing. And hail, a sudden, violent storm lasting mere minutes, can beat a ripening field into a ruined pulp, leaving nothing but shredded stalks and despair where plenty should have been. You watch the sky constantly, interpreting every shift, every shadow. You pray fervently, eyes squeezed shut against the terrifying vastness above. Prayers to God. Yes, but also desperate appeals to the saints. Saint Isidore, patron of farmers. Saint Swithin, known for perhaps even older, whispered words, protective charms tied to branches, offerings left by lonely wells. What else can you do? There is no magic pipe to bring water from miles away when the well runs dry. No glass house to shelter the sprouts from a chilling wind. There is only utter, terrifying dependence on the unpredictable mood swings of nature. When disaster strikes, a flood that sweeps away the mill and washes out the bridge, a blight that turns potatoes black in the earth. There are no royal decrees promising relief, no chests of coin to replace your lost sheep. There is only the meager charity of the church, distributing what little surplus it has or can beg, the reluctant dole from the Lord who still demands his rents, and the shared misery, the quiet desperation mirrored in the faces of your neighbors. Your wealth is the earth's kindness. Your poverty is its indifference or rage. This vulnerability breeds a profound, bone-deep humility. It forces you to recognize your place as a tiny, fragile part of an immense, powerful system. Existence is not measured in clocks or appointments, but in the slow, inexorable turning of the seasons. The cycle of planting, growing, harvesting, enduring. It is a connection to the natural world that feels almost impossibly deep compared to the distanced, climate-controlled lives of the future. It also fosters a kind of profound fatalism. You work from sunup to sundown. You plant and weed and pray. You do everything humanly possible. But ultimately, you know in your gut that the outcome is not yours to command. Your fate rests in higher hands. Divine, yes, but also brutally, environmentally powerful. Reflecting on this absolute dependence on external forces makes you look at the world you will never see. A world of weather forecasts, of genetically modified crops, of massive irrigation projects, of indoor farms. It makes you consider what might be called modern hubris, the belief that humanity can somehow control nature, bend it to its will entirely. Despite all that technology, all that perceived mastery, are we truly less vulnerable to environmental shifts than the medieval peasant? Or have we just built larger, perhaps slower, points of failure? Systems so vast that when they break, the fall will be catastrophic. Ask yourself, has faith in God been replaced by faith in technology? And which faith is more easily broken? A fever burns in your child's eyes. The breath rattles in their chest. Like stones in a shaken gourd, you rub their brow with a cloth dipped in a weak herbal brew. But your hands tremble. This sickness is more than chill. It feels like a weight, an unseen hand pressing down. You cross yourself instinctively, tracing the sign of the cross over the small, burning body. The world isn't just earth and sky, rain and sun, the ache in your bones from labor. It's populated by unseen forces, a dense tapestry woven with threads of grace and malice, hope and bone-deep terror. The village church, small and perhaps drafty, smelling of old stone, wax, and faint damp earth, is the unwavering center of your spiritual and social life. It's where marriages are blessed, births are recorded, and the dead are sent on their way. The priest, a man who might barely read, but knows the Mass by heart and understands the weight of your sins, is your conduit to God. He offers solace when the harvest fails, guidance when disputes flare, and the vital sacraments, baptism to wash away the taint of Adam, confession to cleanse your soul, communion to partake in the divine mystery, that pave the way to salvation in a world that feels designed to drag you towards damnation. The Church promises eternal reward for earthly suffering, a powerful comfort when suffering is your constant companion, a promise whispered against the howling wind and the gnawing hunger. But alongside this structured, Latin-chanted Christian doctrine exists an older, wilder world of folk belief, as real and present as the mud under your feet. There are spirits in the woods, mischievous or malevolent, best left undisturbed. Charms hang above doorways to ward off illness or envy. Rituals, perhaps dating back generations before the first stone of the church was laid, are performed at the edge of the fields or by the village well to bless the crops and ensure fertility. This world is practical, immediate, rooted in the cycles of nature and the unpredictable nature of human interaction. A sudden blight on your vegetables might not just be bad weather. It could be the touch of an evil spirit, or worse, a curse laid by a neighbor whose pig you accidentally injured. Bad luck isn't random. It has a cause, and that cause is often attributed to malevolent intent, either human, witchcraft, or demonic, the devil's influence. You wear an amulet, perhaps a small bag of herbs, a saint's medal, or a curiously shaped stone given to you by your grandmother. You cross yourself, not just in church, but against the evil eye if someone looks at you askance, or before entering a dark, unfamiliar building. You tell tales by the firelight of mischievous fairies who steal cream from the dairy, or malevolent demons who tempt travelers off the path. The devil isn't some distant concept. He is real, actively seeking to corrupt souls, whispering doubts, causing discord, and even sending earthly plagues. The fear is palpable. A cold knot in the stomach when the crops are failing, or sickness sweeps through the village. This visceral fear, born of incomprehension and vulnerability, gives life to the unseen forces, making them tangible threats or potential helpers. Was it faith that saved them from the plague, or the desperate, clamoring rituals performed outside the church walls? The answer, perhaps, is that they didn't distinguish. They used every tool they had. Faith and superstition are not separate paths, but intertwined threads in the fabric of life. They provide frameworks to understand a confusing, often terrifying world without science or medicine as we know it. The Church offers ultimate meaning and cosmic order. Folk beliefs offer practical, if often ineffective, ways to exert some perceived control over uncontrollable events. This dual worldview reveals a deep, enduring human need to find meaning and order in the face of uncertainty, to attribute cause to the unknown, to seek supernatural explanations for misfortune, and to cling to rituals for comfort and perceived protection. While the specific fears and beliefs differ drastically from your own world, the impulse persists. Ask yourself, what unseen forces do you believe in? What rituals do you cling to for comfort or a sense of control when life feels overwhelming? This deep human need for explanation and agency, masked in medieval garb, is still very much alive. The aching in your back is a constant companion, a dull drumbeat against the endless rhythm of the seasons and the soil. The rising sun means labor, the setting sun means exhaustion, and the gnawing possibility of hunger tomorrow. But then, the church bells ring, not just for prayer, but for release. Easter Sunday bursts upon the village like a sudden bloom after a brutal frost. Fasting gives way to feasting, humble fare, elevated to banquet status by sheer abundance compared to the usual thin gruel and hard bread. There are eggs, perhaps even a precious bit of cured meat saved for this very day. The strictures loosen. The village green, usually a space for weary transit, becomes a stage for lifeblood. The air thrums with sound. Rough, hearty singing, pipes and drums coaxing tired feet into clumsy, joyful circles. You dance until your muscles scream. But it's a different kind of ache, one born of exhilaration, not just grinding work. Laughter rings out, genuine and unrestrained, a sound so rare it feels almost miraculous. Children, usually small adults burdened with chores, chase each other freely, their faces smeared with food, their energy boundless. A wedding, too, isn't just a union of two people. It's a validation of community, a promise of continuity, another reason to spill out into the streets, share precious food and drink, and forget, for a single bright day, the wolf forever scratching at the door. These bursts of collective joy are more than mere entertainment. They are survival mechanisms, as vital as the harvest itself. The church, often a source of fear and obligation, becomes the unexpected architect of reprieve, its calendar providing mandated breaks from the relentless grind. Without these moments, the sheer weight of daily life, the sickness, the death, the back-breaking work, the constant uncertainty, would crush the spirit entirely. They are safety valves, releasing the pressure of existence, preventing despair from becoming absolute. A storyteller might arrive, their words weaving magic around a crackling fire, transporting weary minds to lands where heroes still triumph and witches are outsmarted. For a few hours, the cold, hard reality softens, replaced by wonder and shared imagination. And then there is the ale, brewed by your wife from precious grain, or bought from the alewife in her smoky cottage. It is the small, attainable comfort at the end of a punishing day. It warms the belly, loosens the tongue, and for a brief time, dulls the sharpness of worry. Gathered with neighbors, the shared drink dissolves the isolation of individual struggle, reinforcing the bonds that hold the community together. Peace moments, simple and sensory, are intensely appreciated, precisely because they are so scarce. They are not endless streams of manufactured novelty, but deeply rooted traditions, carved out of time itself, connecting you not just to your neighbors, but to generations past who found joy in the very same ways. This makes you pause. In our modern age, drowning in endless entertainment options and constant digital stimulation, are we truly more joyful? Have we lost the capacity for intense, shared appreciation that comes from scarcity, from a single day of feasting after weeks of hunger, from a simple song shared under the stars after a lifetime of quiet toil? What are the simple, communal moments in your life that genuinely nourish your spirit, that feel precious, not despite their simplicity, but because of it? The smoke clings to your rough wool tunic like a second skin, a perpetual smell mixed with wood smoke, sweat, and whatever the pigs left by the path this morning. You wash your hands, perhaps your face, in cold water poured from a jug first thing, a quick splash against the chill. But the bath? That's a rare festival, maybe twice or 3 times a year, if your village has access to heated water and the means to heat it in any quantity. Your clothes are washed less often than you'd like to think, boiled occasionally in a shared vat with lye soap made from ash and animal fat. They're itchy, stiff when dry, forever stained. Cleanliness isn't about comfort. It's a fleeting, practical truce with the grime of living. Waste is simply there. It's the compost pile by the cottage, the ditch running through the street, the privy pit you share with 6 families. It's the animal dung on the floor of the barn you sleep above in winter, the slop bucket near the hearth. You try to manage it, perhaps scattering ash, but it's a losing battle against the sheer volume of daily living, against the rain washing things down the slope, against the flies. You learn to step carefully, to hold your breath when the wind shifts the wrong way. This pervasive, inescapable dirt is the backdrop of your life, not an occasional inconvenience. And because of it, sickness is a constant neighbor. A cough rattles in your chest for weeks every spring. Your belly aches frequently. Fevers sweep through the village like wildfire, taking the old and the very young with terrifying speed. You know the symptoms: shivering, sweating, the bright, unnatural flush in the cheeks of someone who was hale yesterday. A bad cut festers into a limb-threatening nightmare. A sudden, sharp pain in your gut can mean the end. There is no doctor coming, There are only the remedies your grandmother taught your mother. A poultice of dock leaves for a bruise, a bitter herbal tea for a fever, a prayer whispered over a sick child. You seek out the wise woman, if your village is lucky enough to have one. She knows the plants, the seasons they should be gathered, the specific incantations or prayers that might soothe a fever or ease a cough. But her knowledge is empirical, passed down through generations of trial and error, and deeply entwined with faith and superstition. She might tell you to drink a potion, but also to wear an amulet or avoid looking at the moon, because nobody understands why people get sick. It's the damp night air. It's unbalanced humors in the blood. It's a curse laid by an enemy. It's divine punishment for a sin you didn't even know you committed. The idea that invisible things you breathe or touch could make you ill is utterly foreign, a concept beyond comprehension in this world of tangible threats and spiritual forces. This raw, exposed vulnerability of the medieval body is the most profound difference from your own time. Modern public health, sanitation, antibiotics, surgery. These are miracles you entirely take for granted. Here, your body is a fragile vessel, constantly under siege from the elements and the invisible forces, both real microbes and imagined demons, that surround you. Could you endure the pervasive dirt, the constant low hum of illness in your community? The near certainty that a simple infection could end your life? It forces you to appreciate the silent, unseen infrastructure that keeps you healthy today. The clean water flowing from your tap. The sewers that whisk waste away. The sterile needles and precise medicines. It reveals how fundamentally precarious life was when knowledge was limited, resources were scarce, and the very air seemed thick with danger. Ask yourself, how much of your modern confidence, your expectation of a long life, is built purely on the foundation of public health you never even see working? Was medieval acceptance of sickness fatalism, or simply the only way to cope when your remedies were prayers and roots, and death was a constant, uninvited guest at your hearth? The first light is gray, seeping through the chinks in the thatch and the single oiled linen window. You shiver, not just from the cold that still clings to the walls, but from the damp chill that seems to seep into your bones. Around you, bundled in rough wool blankets on straw-filled pallets, are the other members of your family. Your world, your small, fragile kingdom. Survival begins here, in the crowded dark, before dawn. This isn't a unit built on shared dreams or individual fulfillment. It is an engine, forged by necessity, fueled by sweat. Marriage wasn't a romantic quest, but a careful calculation of hands and hectares. Your partner brought their strength, their knowledge of the seasons, perhaps a small inheritance of tools or livestock. You brought yours. Together, you are a slightly larger anchor against the relentless tide of hunger and cold. Your children are not just bundles of joy. They are the future labor force, the fragile hope that this arduous life might continue, that the land might still be worked when your own back is too bent, your hands too gnarled. By the age of 7 or 8, The distinction between child and worker blurs into insignificance. Little hands learn to weed, to gather wood, to spin coarse wool. Young backs learn the ache of carrying buckets from the well. Daughters sit with their mothers, fingers clumsy at first, then deft at weaving the cloth that keeps the family warm. They learn the secrets of the pot, the tending of the few precious chickens. Sons follow fathers, learning the rhythms of the plow, the feel of the soil, the brutal wisdom of when to plant, when to pray for rain, when to brace for frost. The silence that falls when one of you is gone is more than grief. It is a practical terror. A missing hand at the loom means less cloth for the market, less coin for salt. An empty space beside you in the field means the work takes longer. The harvest is less secure. The cough that racks your youngest child is not just a sound of suffering. It is the potential unraveling of your future. A terrible, visceral fear that whispers of empty bellies and back-breaking labor left undone. Death, the constant, unwelcome guest, is not merely an emotional blow, though the ache of a lost child is a wound that never truly heals, a bell that tolls forever in your heart. It is an economic crisis. The empty place at the meager table means less food consumed, perhaps, but also less work accomplished. This is the deep root of your world. Family as function. Kinship is currency. Your value and theirs is inextricably tied to the land, to the ability to wring sustenance from reluctant soil. Contrast this with the soft world you know, where family is often a matter of feeling, of individual choice. Here, choice is a luxury you cannot afford. The structure of your family, the roles within it, are dictated by the sun, the rain, and the ever-present threat of want. How would it feel to know that your own children's survival and yours depended so starkly on their ability to work? To see their small, developing bodies not just with love, but with a farmer's eye, calculating future strength. Would you resent this brutal math, or accept it as the fundamental truth of your existence, bending your love, your hopes, to fit the harsh mold of necessity? Dust motes dance in the single shaft of light, piercing the smoky air of the longhouse. Not a grand hall, just the biggest house in the village, borrowed for the day. Here, beneath the rough-hewn beams, justice is dispensed. A low murmur of voices. You stand near the back, watching. Before the Lord's steward, a pale, sharp-faced man from the manor, stands Thomas, the fuller, and Mary, the weaver. Their dispute? A boundary stone moved, Thomas claims, shrinking his tiny plot, costing him precious inches of harvest. Mary swears by the Virgin and all the saints that the stone has stood there since her grandfather's time. This is the village court, the manorial court. No wigs, no parchment scrolls of codified law. Justice here wears the face of custom, common sense, and the steward's will, which is, of course, the Lord's will. The reeve, the villager's elected representative, stands beside the steward, offering quiet counsel rooted in generations of local practice. Thomas offers neighbors good, honest men, to swear oaths for his claim, compurgation. Mary challenges him, her voice tight with fear and righteous anger, daring him to trial by ordeal, to plunge his hand into boiling water to prove his truth. The steward, perhaps pragmatic, perhaps simply bored, shakes his head. Ordeal is messy, unpredictable. Oaths can be bought or coerced. He listens, asks sharp questions, eyes flicking between Thomas and Mary, weighing not just their words, but the potential disruption this quarrel causes to the village's work, to the harvest that feeds the manor. Justice isn't about abstract rights or legal precedent. It's about keeping the peace, ensuring the village runs smoothly, ensuring the rent gets paid and the crops come in. Thomas is a good fuller, Mary a skilled weaver. Disrupting their lives too severely is bad business for the Lord. The steward delivers his judgment. A fine, perhaps, payable in chickens or days of labor on the Lord's domain. Maybe a public admonishment for one or both. A shaming that will sting more than any lash. For a graver crime, like theft of something truly valuable, it might be losing a hand, or worse. There is no appeal to a distant king's court for the likes of you. Your fate is in the hands of the steward, the reeve, and the unspoken, potent weight of community opinion. If your neighbors believe you, if the steward favors you, you might find a kind of resolution. If not, you bear the consequence. This system, raw and personal, underscores a chilling truth. You possess no inherent legal rights. Justice flows from authority, the Lord's, and from the unwritten rules of the community. It makes you wonder, would you trust your fate to the judgment of people you know, whose biases and grudges you understand, or the cold, pragmatic eye of the Lord's man? Could you navigate a world where your word and the word of those around you holds more sway than any written law? The mist clings to the low ground as you walk the path to the south field, wrapping the distant trees in a shroud of mystery. This is your world, these few square miles, the cluster of wattle and daub huts you call a village, the crisscross of paths worn by generations of feet, the fields where your life is sown and reaped. Beyond the familiar woods that mark the edge of your Lord's domain, beyond the slow winding river where you draw water and maybe catch a meager fish, lies, rumor, whisper, the unknown. News, as you understand it, is a slow-moving current, often arriving like flotsam on a flood tide. A traveling merchant, smelling faintly of foreign spice and road dust, might arrive perhaps twice a year, setting up his small display of metal pots, better cloth, or exotic trinkets you can only dream of affording. He brings tales of great cities where buildings scrape the sky, of strange men in even stranger lands, of kings and battles fought leagues away. But his stories are filtered through his own understanding, often exaggerated to impress, or deliberately vague about dangers encountered. They are like the flickering images in a fire, fascinating, but not quite real. Certainly not impacting whether your cow gives milk tomorrow or if the late spring frost kills the barley sprouts. The priest, is another conduit to the outside. He has been to the nearest town, perhaps even seen a bishop. He speaks of the Church Universal, of papal pronouncements that seem grand and important, but filter down to your life only as new saints, days to observe, or perhaps a slightly different phrasing in the Mass. He talks of faraway crusades, holy wars against enemies you cannot picture. But these vast conflicts mean little compared to the ongoing skirmish with wolves that threaten your sheep, or the silent war against the rats in your granary. Your existence is micro-local. The health of your neighbor, the fairness of the Reeves demands, the success of this harvest, these are the axis on which your world turns. A good harvest means survival. A poor one means hunger, sickness, perhaps even death before the next spring. The fate of a distant kingdom is an abstract concept, less pressing than the price your Lord will pay for your surplus grain, if there is any. This intense focus on the immediate shapes everything. You learn to read the sky for rain, not maps of continents you'll never see. You know the moods of your neighbors, the telltale signs of sickness passing through the village, the best spots for wild herbs in the nearby woods. Your knowledge is deep but narrow, rooted firmly in the soil beneath your feet. The grand narratives of history unfold silently, often completely unbeknownst to you. A king might sign a charter ensuring rights for townsmen. A university might be founded, churning out scholars. A new trade route might open, changing the course of commerce. These are events happening in a different dimension, their ripples perhaps reaching you decades later, in the form of a slightly higher tax or a new type of tool brought by that rare merchant. There is a certain grounding in this limited sphere. Your anxieties are tangible. The biting cold of winter, the gnawing fear of the plague when a traveler coughs, the constant worry over enough food. They are fears tied to your physical reality, things you can, perhaps, pray about, work against, or see with your own eyes. They lack the pervasive, often abstract dread born of knowing too much about too many things you cannot possibly influence. We live today, drowning in an ocean of global information, disasters, political crises, distant conflicts, instantly delivered to our palms. Our anxiety is often a product of this saturation, this constant awareness of threats and problems far beyond our reach. What would it feel like to have your world defined by a few square miles? Would the absence of global worry create a different kind of peace? Or merely leave you desperately vulnerable to local catastrophe, ignorant of larger forces that might offer aid or pose unseen threats? This small, bounded life was not chosen. It was given. It demanded resilience, yes, but also a quiet acceptance of severe limits on knowledge, on influence, on the very scope of your understanding of the human world. It is a reminder that for most of history, for most people, the world was not flat maps and news bulletins, but the curve of the nearest hill and the sound of the church bell calling you back to the only reality you knew. The smell of damp earth and animal warmth is the first thing you know each morning. The sow grunts softly near the hearth, her breathing deep and steady. Your few chickens rustle in their corner, a quiet clucking promising the day's eggs. The heavy breathing of the oxen outside the main door, separated by a thin wall perhaps, is the pulse of your potential. These aren't just creatures you own. They are limbs of your own survival, living intimately alongside you. Sharing the same smoky air, vulnerable to the same winter chill. The sow is your future fat, the grease for your cooking pot, the salt-cured meat that might see you through the lean months after the harvest is gone. Each egg from the scrawny hens is a small miracle, pure protein in a diet clinging often to gruel and dark bread. But it is the oxen, or the single sturdy horse, that truly hold your destiny in their hooves. They are the engine that turns the stubborn soil, pulling the plowshare that must break ground and plant the seeds that feed your family, feed your Lord, feed the cycle of life and death that governs everything. Losing one of these working beasts isn't a financial setback. It is a potentially fatal wound to your household. A dead ox means less land plowed, a smaller harvest, a higher chance of starvation when the snow flies. It means begging neighbors for help you can ill afford to repay, or worse, facing the winter with empty bellies and colder fires. You tend to them with a fierce protective care born not of sentimentality, but of absolute necessity. A limp, a cough, a refusal to eat, these are not minor inconveniences. They are omens of potential disaster. You watch for signs of the murrain, the terrifying sickness that can sweep through a village's stock like a demon's breath, leaving behind only silence and ruin. You bar your door against wolves and rustlers alike, knowing a beast stolen is a future stolen. There is a bond forged in this shared struggle, a rough, wordless affection for these creatures whose lives are so deeply entwined with your own. They see you tend their wounds, share your meager warmth, bring them what little fodder you can spare. You see them labor under the yoke, suffer through the seasons, provide the sustenance and power that keeps your blood flowing. This cohabitation, this absolute integration of human and animal life, forces a perspective alien to the soft world you inhabit now. Your animals aren't separated behind fences or seen only as packages in a butcher's shop. They are living, breathing members of your extended, struggling family. Their fertility, their health, their very breath is a constant, visible measure of your own well-being. It's a life where the smell of dung and the bleating of a lamb are as familiar and vital as the cries of your own children. Ask yourself, what would it feel like to know the animals we rely on so intimately, to understand their value in terms of your own survival, rather than abstract market prices? How has our relationship with the animal world changed now that most of us don't live alongside our food sources, now that the reality of their life and death is hidden behind sterile walls and plastic wrap. The medieval peasant knew the cost of his food intimately, in muscle, sweat, and the ever-present fear of loss. That connection, however harsh, has been severed. The sun dips low, a pale ghost in the frigid sky. You feel it first in the bones, the subtle shift in the air, the way sounds seem sharper, more brittle. The days have bled into each other, each one shorter than the last, surrendering precious hours to the encroaching gloom. Life, which pulsed outward during the long summer light, now contracts, retreating indoors like a frightened animal. The cottage becomes a universe unto itself, centered entirely around the fire. This isn't just warmth. It is the beating heart of survival. Without it, there is no cooking, no heat against the bone-deep cold that seeps through wattled walls, no defense against the chilling damp that breeds sickness. Every daylight hour must be squeezed dry for essential tasks, mending tools before the iron rusts, checking the dwindling stores of grain and preserved food, perhaps a desperate trip to the forest edge for fallen branches. But the light yields quickly, leaving behind long, oppressive evenings. Darkness inside. The fire is your sun, but it's a stingy, flickering thing. Maybe, if you're lucky, there's a rushlight burning, a simple reed dipped in animal fat, giving off more smoke and smell than illumination. These are precious, used sparingly. The long hours stretching ahead are lived by the meager, dancing light of the hearth, casting monstrous shadows on the walls. Wood is the constant, desperate need. Someone is always gathering, always chopping, always feeding the insatiable maw of the fire. Winter is a time of hardship, yes, but it is also a time forged by darkness and necessity into something else. With outdoor work impossible, the evenings are given over to tasks that require little light and much patience. Mending torn tunics, sharpening scythes, weaving simple baskets. But mostly, they are for gathering. Not just bodies huddling close for shared warmth against the cold, but minds gathering around the fire. Stories are told, myths recounted, gossip shared in low voices. The trials of the past harvest are debated, hopes for the spring whispered like prayers. Children, usually busy with chores, listen wide-eyed to tales of saints and demons that surely lurk just beyond the faint circle of firelight. Superstition thrives in the dark, each creak of the timbers potentially a restless spirit or a hungry beast drawn by the scent of smoke and life. Fear, in the absence of light, finds fertile ground. The cause and effect is clear. The dark breeds anxiety, and anxiety breeds ritual, prayer, or the retelling of cautionary tales designed to keep everyone close and quiet. This enforced stillness, this dependence on a limited communal light source, dictates a rhythm utterly alien to us now. We banish darkness with the flick of a switch, push back the cold with invisible warmth, extend our working hours, our entertainment, our very concept of time indefinitely. But what is lost when night is no longer a signal for enforced rest, for communal gathering around a shared, limited light source, for reflection dictated by the simple, undeniable cycle of the sun. What does constant illumination change about our relationship with sleep, with community, with the ancient, unyielding rhythm of the year? Ask yourself, when was the last time the setting sun truly dictated your rhythm, forcing you into stillness and shared human warmth? Perhaps that quiet, fire-lit melancholy, the weight of the encroaching darkness, was also a strange kind of gift. You look upon the weathered face of your neighbor Elsbeth. She's perhaps 40, her hair a tangle of gray, her body stooped from years of labor. Yet the village calls her the old woman. It is not unkindness, it is simple truth. If you live to see your 30th year, the strength of youth has largely faded. You are considered middle-aged, your life's great work likely done. By 40, you walk among the elders. Life is not measured in decades stretched long, filled with distant dreams and leisurely retirements. It is measured in seasons, in harvests reaped, in winters survived. It is measured in the quiet, brutal tolling of bells. The bell for an infant who drew only a few breaths. The bell for a mother whose strength gave out, bringing new life into a harsh world. The bell for a strong man felled by a sudden fever, leaving fields untilled and mouths hungry. The bell for the elder, not much older than Elsbeth, who simply faded with the last bitter frost. Death is not a distant, abstract concept hidden behind walls. It is a constant, visible presence, a shadow that walks the muddy paths of your village, claiming neighbors, friends, family. This omnipresent possibility of abrupt ending fundamentally alters your perspective on time itself. The grand narratives of long-term planning, of personal ambition blooming over decades, feel like fantasies suitable only for saints in stained glass or lords in distant castles. For you, time is not a river flowing endlessly towards a horizon you will reach in your twilight years. Time is a flickering candle flame, easily extinguished by a gust of wind, a bad cough, a spilled pot of boiling water, or the sudden, terrifying appearance of a boil under your armpit. This doesn't mean a life lived in perpetual despair. It means a life lived with an intense focus on the immediate. The future is less a landscape to be shaped and more a precarious ledge you hope to simply reach. What matters is this year's harvest. Will it be enough to see you through winter? What matters is your current health. Can you work the fields today? Or will you become another burden? What matters is fulfilling your role within the strict, necessary structure of the community, because your survival and theirs depends on it. There is little room for delayed gratification when gratification itself is so uncertain. Marry young, for who knows what tomorrow brings. Have children soon, and pray they survive infancy, for they are your only hope of support should you live long enough to become truly frail. Learn the skills needed now: farming, weaving, blacksmithing, not for some future career progression, but because these skills ensure survival in the here and now. The concept of investing years into something that might pay off far down the line feels like a reckless gamble against a fate that rarely favors the patient. And if this life is so short, so fragile, so often painful, where does hope reside? It resides overwhelmingly in the next life. Every prayer whispered, every penny given to the church, every moment spent fearing damnation, these are not just abstract acts of faith. They are the ultimate long-term planning. If this existence is but a blink, a trial of suffering and hardship, then the only rational strategy is to secure eternal salvation. The brevity and brutality of life here on earth make the promise of an unending, pain-free existence in heaven the most compelling force imaginable. It is an irony, perhaps melancholic, that the greatest hope is placed in a reality that requires your current, difficult life to end. Consider our own world, where 80 years is the norm, where we plan for retirement decades away, chart ambitious career paths that span half a century, and invest in futures we fully expect to see. This expectation of longevity is a privilege so profound, so fundamental, that it shapes our very understanding of self, purpose, and happiness. It allows for exploration, reinvention, and the pursuit of personal fulfillment over vast stretches of time. Ask yourself, if you knew, with chilling certainty, that your time was likely short, your body fragile, and pain a frequent visitor, what would you prioritize? Would you chase fleeting personal glory, or would you focus on the immediate survival of your family and community? How would that shape your relationships? Fierce, loyal, yet constantly aware of potential loss. How would it redefine your fears? Not just of failure, but of simply running out of time before the essential tasks are done. How would it temper your hopes, shifting from earthly achievement to heavenly grace? It highlights just how much of our modern worldview, our very identity, is built upon the simple, extraordinary gift of expecting a long life. They measured a lifetime differently, and in doing so, they built a world entirely unlike our own, yet one we stand upon today. You stand, finally, on the edge of your years. The soil you've worked your entire life feels like an extension of your own weathered skin. Calloused hands, permanently curved spine, these are the markers of a life spent bent to the earth's will. You remember the gnawing hunger that was a constant companion, the bite of cold that stole breath from the frail, the coughs that became death rattles, carrying loved ones to the churchyard. Your world was dictated by the Lord's demand, the capricious sky, and a faith woven with strands of sheer terror. Yet, etched just as deeply are the moments of pure, unadulterated joy. The heft of a successful harvest sheaf in your arms. A child's sudden bright laughter chasing shadows from the hut. The simple, profound warmth of bodies huddled around a fire on a bitter night. The divine taste of fresh bread after months of gnawing on stale, dry grain. Your legacy isn't etched in stone or recorded in scrolls. It's written in the stubborn persistence of a life lived day by day, year after year, defined by resilience, by the quiet refusal to simply cease. Looking back at this life so starkly different from our own, you don't just see hardship. You see a profound, almost staggering human strength. The sheer capacity to endure relentless physical labor, to find glimmering sparks of hope in the face of constant vulnerability, to somehow forge bonds of community and shared purpose amidst gnawing scarcity. It speaks to something irreducible, fundamental about what it means to be human. They lived with the devil's breath imagined in every draft, every unexplained fever, every failed crop. Yet every spring they still walked out and pushed seeds into the cold, reluctant soil. An act of faith so profound it almost defies understanding, a belief in a future they might not even live to witness. They had none of our accumulated knowledge, none of our cushioning technology, none of our fleeting comforts. Yet they found ways to live, to love, to worship, and to find meaning in a world that offered little ease and less certainty. They sang lullabies even as the plague bells tolled. Have we truly evolved, or have we merely altered the battleground? Our fears wear different masks now: economic tremors, environmental anxiety, the chilling silence of social isolation. But the underlying human imperatives remain: the fierce drive to survive, the ache to connect, the need to find purpose in the brief span given to us. We've traded the visible chains of feudal obligation for the invisible pressures of endless expectation and digital comparison. We've conquered some ancient diseases, only to birth new anxieties, chronic stresses, and existential doubts. We possess a universe of choices, perhaps, but often feel adrift, less certain of our place than the peasant tied inextricably to their plot of land and their god. Their life, raw and stripped down to the bone, offers a brutal clarity, revealing the very core of human nature. A tenacious, infinitely adaptable, fearful, hopeful creature, bound irrevocably to the earth and to each other, finding ways against all sense and reason to persist against overwhelming odds. Their world is a distant star in the historical sky, but the echoes of their struggle, their resilience, their quiet, furious hope resonate deeply within us still. They planted in hope, despite the all-consuming fear that was their daily bread. Do we still plant in hope in our brightly lit, disconnected world? They had no legacy carved in stone, but every seed they planted, every prayer they whispered in terror, built the world we now take for granted.